Give a couple more minutes for people to join. Something changed recently and I can no longer figure out how to share just a window. So I'm sharing my full desktop. Oh, David Wheeler is trying to get in. It won't let him join.
I turned off the lobby for the meeting. I don't know if that was causing.
Oh, that might be. Okay, let's see. So I just got someone else. Yeah. Did you turn it back on now or?
No, I just turned it off, so it may have been a delay or something, but
Oh.
it should auto admit everybody now.
Okay. Yeah, I got a note from David saying, trying to get in, it won't let me. And then I said, I didn't see him in the lobby and asked if he's getting an error. Still don't see him on.
We could call out to him, or he can just call in direct on his cell phone if he just wants audio. That should bypass if there's any weirdness going on with Teams.
Let's see. He's writing a note. No, he says he's getting a "we'll let you know." I wonder if that's it. We'll let you know when the meeting is started or when someone lets you in.
You got me.
Right. Ask if he. Oh, it says when the meeting starts, we'll let you know. Wonder if he's got a previous meeting invitation. We go to meeting details and.
Hey, Dixon here. Can you give me edit access to the doc?
Access to the doc? Yes. I think so. We might need Michael to do that.
Yeah, if you can, I will. I just got home, so I'm good now.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you for letting me in.
You're welcome. Did you have the wrong meeting request, or I wonder what happened?
I don't know. It's the one on my calendar.
Oh, interesting.
But I tried the one on the meeting notes, and that did work.
Okay. All right.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we've got a good group here. Finally, with some, the usual video conference kerfuffles at the beginning of the meeting. Michael, do you want to take over now that you're back home, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I could just kick it off real quick, but
Sure.
As you said, welcome everybody.
Okay.
Have a nice weekend. Happy Monday, and good morning or good evening. So, do we on the call? I think everybody that's on the call has been on here before. So welcome back, everybody. I think for agenda for today, if anybody has anything else that they would like to talk about, just add it into at the end of the agenda on the notes. I'm going to check my email and give everybody edit access who doesn't have it. So that'll. It's actually a bunch of you guys do these right now. So if you guys all, if for Dixon, Dan, Maya, Dixon, Dan, and Maya, you guys should have access in like 60 seconds. And yeah, so I think the first order for today is going through the requirements document. So okay, I'll kind of hand it off to you if you want to drive.
Okay, that works. All right, so in our meeting 2 weeks ago, or a little less than 2 weeks ago, we walked through the goals, scenarios, and requirements for 3 projects that are currently part of this group, or related to this group. One is the CII Best Practices Badge. The other is the Security Metrics Project, which is definitely that's what this group has been working on for a couple of months now. And then also a security scorecards initiative that the Google team has been kicking off, and that is they're looking at that to feed into some of the work that will go on in the securing critical projects working group. So this week, and as we talked through those, we identified places where there are commonalities, common goals and scenarios, and some places where there are some differences. And what I have done since then is I made an effort to create a section that I called Common, where I was trying to capture the things that are common across them. And yeah, so I guess we can start with that. I did another thing as I was going through this, which was to try to frame some of the requirements that were listed in the top ones in more general ways, so that it might be that we can think about them all as having similar goals, scenarios, and requirements. So, but let's just walk through this and see what people think and what comments we might have. So for common, let's see. For common goals, when I tried to summarize across all of them, a goal that I came up with was collect, curate, and communicate metrics that reflect the security posture of open source components. So why don't I go through all of this first quickly, and then we can come back and dig in where there might be questions, or we want to try to clarify some wording. For scenarios, I had maintainers and open source contributors can understand what concrete steps they can take to improve the security posture of their projects. Another one is organizations can understand the security posture of open source projects they depend on. Another is organizations can automate internal checks or policies based on security data. And then the last one I have is security researchers can understand the security posture of critical at-risk components and share those learnings with others in the community and potentially collaboratively. So then for requirements, and this is rough and these will need some refinement. I had security criteria can be as specific as possible and not limited to general recommendations. For example, for a specific programming language, we might have criteria that recommends or requires language-specific linters and analyzers to be run on the code base. A second one is consumers of the data can filter data to meet specific requirements. So for example, a customer may require that the data received contain only automatable objective data, or consumers may require that the data must be actionable such that it can be used for helping a project to check all the boxes.
Do you want comments as we're going along, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I specific recommendations is good. I do worry about and recommending specific linters and analyzers. Good idea, especially if you make it easy to click a button. Requiring specific linters or analyzers, I worry about because, you know, stuff gets changed, software gets abandoned, and I would much rather require, you know, here are the checks, not use tool X.
Okay. Do you want to? Yeah. Do you want to make a comment in there?
Yeah. I'll have to find which tab that is in.
Oh, you want me to drop this into
No.
the chat?
You carry on. You carry on. I will just. Yeah. In general, I worry about mandating tools. I think mandating, you know, criteria is the right thing, and then telling here's a tool that'll help you do that. But if a better tool comes along, I want us to be able to move to the better tool.
Right. Okay. All right. So I know where this is coming from, and we don't have Kim or Dan on with us yet. Kim, I guess, has a power outage at her home, and I know drag. And
oh my goodness.
Dan had a conflict for the first part of the meeting, so he'll be back with us. But I know where they're coming from. So for the securing critical projects, I think they are trying to, they're trying to create a framework where they will require they want to require specific linters or analyzers to be run, and that's so that they can have, so they're looking at, and others are looking at, providing some resources, some funding, so we can have contractors that go actually do a bunch of work, and so to analyze code bases, and they want to be able to do that work and then get a check when that work is done. So I think we might want something that recommends, but maybe also captures what tool was used to meet the recommendation or something like that. So
I think having that as, maybe I think it might make sense to kind of separate out what a secure piece, the characteristics of a secure piece of software, meaning it doesn't have this type of issue, and the ways that, like, in other words, in order to get the, whatever we want to call it, the critical project stamp certification of goodness, that might require a specific tool to pass. But from a for other parts of this kind of document, if we're giving security metrics and recommendations on how to validate those, I think I agree with David mostly that we should be careful about going like over-indexing on a particular tool. We can certainly do that on the certification side, I think, because the certification is that you passed, that the tool says you passed.
Right. In that case, you're using the tool as an embodiment of the criteria. You're not necessarily saying it has to be this tool.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I see. Good. And thanks for capturing that, David, in a comment, and I can take a pass at updating that text a little later. What we want
Sure.
is what we want is the security requirements, and the tool can be used to satisfy that. So, or
Yes.
document that has been satisfied. Okay. All right. So next one, let's see. I read through this one already, but we can stop and has comments on that. Consumers of the data can filter it to meet their specific requirements. So anyway, so there's granular querying on the data. I think it's the way I want to summarize that requirement. Okay. Data may be populated for any open source project without any work or interaction from maintainers.
Yeah, I would just put scare quotes around the any, because God knows what kind of, oh, sorry, the first any, before any open source project.
Oh, okay.
Just because
I see.
In theory, sure, but you could have some that are just
off the grid and
really, yeah.
Right.
I think you
Okay.
should be able to gather data as long as the repo is publicly accessible.
But there are a lot that there is no repo. It's just it's a it's
as
a
I said,
file on my FTP site.
I'm sorry. Right. But for example, if there is a repo that's accessible, for any, I would say any open source software, as long as it has a public repo.
I mean, yeah, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but there are a lot of projects on NPM that there is no repo for. They happen to be open source, but there's no way to collaborate.
Is that
They just
missing?
directly. Yeah, they do. Well, they don't have a public repo.
Right, but I think
so
we should still include them, because so it's actually a good point. Are we like what is the target of like what is our kind of first class object in this whole thing? Is it a repo? Is it a distribution of a piece of is it a binary archive that you get from NuGet or NPM or PyPy? Is it a repo? Is it the spiritual essence of zlib or leftpad? And now we go into the rabbit hole, and we'll never come out. So we keep it super general.
Yeah, can we all agree to not do spiritual essence, because I'm not sure how to point to that. But you know what? Although I think folks who implement the tools should have flexibility in what they want to do. I think if there's no public repo, maybe we don't worry about it so much, because that's already a massive risk. Maybe you don't want to deal with that project at all, and even if you do, you don't have a reasonable way to interact. Now, it doesn't have to be on GitHub. It could be GitLab. It could be Savannah. Somebody's special site. Some larger projects have their own sites, but I mean, if somebody wants to do something else where anything posted on NPM, I mean, go do. But I think that would be I think that's excessively hard.
Well, I would say that the lack of a repo is a really important metric to convey.
Yes.
So
we can talk about network time protocol for Daemon, for example.
Yes.
Not to name names.
Yeah.
I'm adding an item at the very top with another requirement, which is security criteria can be collected for open source projects, source code, packages. What are there things that we want beyond source code and packages? We decide.
Well, I would say if you say repos, I think you cover a multitude of sins.
I think any kind of binary.
Wow. You want to go down that road?
Well, I don't know why a package would be different than anything else that I could run.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you only have a binary, you do not know anything about the number of contributors or activity or issues or anything else like that.
That might be interesting in for some things, but not
Absolutely.
for others. So
Okay.
I think I'm agreeing, which is that if we build something that's general, it'd be great to be able to capture repos, packages, binaries.
Yeah. The other one that I would
nice...
put in the general category, I don't know if we want to get there or not, is data.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And are you thinking of data like machine learning data, or
Yep. Any data that I might use as part of my application eventually. So my training data set, for example, if I could verify the same things for my training data, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you're going to do this, please put repo somewhere in this bullet, because projects, repos, before the word source code.
Before the word
yeah, absolutely. You can have a project and no repo. That's easy. That's a problem.
Okay.
Well,
so
for
I can
any
say
open
projects,
source
repos. Am I getting that
repos.
okay?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, not rows.
I could just do that.
Okay.
Whoops. Well, all right.
Yeah, but if we're both doing it at the same time, there's a small problem.
All righty, but we can see it. Yes.
Just to add to Maya's points around binaries, I think it's nice to display this data for binaries for which we don't have the type of information we'd have from source code as well, to help underline and illustrate the risk associated with just picking up a binary off the internet. And also, like, I guess there's this whole question of provenance, and we can start to highlight in a really consistent way across the different forms that software can take within this metrics dashboard, like what those kind of meta best practices are. Like, don't run, unsigned random binaries that you find on the internet. So I think it's helpful to illustrate those things. I guess to the point about data, I struggle with it a little bit, just because, like, you can have something look like a data set that's actually super malicious, and I don't know if we will, in any near-term time, have tools that will help us validate that. So I would worry a little bit about us giving, like, false promises on a data set, just because thinking about how to do the tooling to analyze it sufficiently, I'm not sure if that would be something we could build in.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I don't think that data is something that at least I'm not something to tackle anytime soon. But with something that's more list, maybe you're right. Maybe we'll remove it from here.
Yeah, it would be amazing. Like, I think about, like, the extensibility, and if we build for extensibility, that would be really cool to do it with data. But I think about, like, just as a threat actor, like, what you can do with a malicious data set, and I would just worry that we have a big problem to solve before we could do it with any level of assurance.
Understood. I think the requirement that I have here is more like extensibility rather than necessarily supporting data.
Yeah, and that makes a ton of sense. That's awesome.
Okay. Yep. So what if I said this way? Something like a requirement is, I'll say, solution. Security data can be collected for open source projects, repos, binaries, possibly data in the future. Okay, now let's go back down to where we were.
Wait, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm assuming, and I think we should do this, but open source meaning if it's not under an open source license, it doesn't exist to us. And I think that being under the umbrella of the OpenSSF, I think that's a reasonable way to split the universe in between kind of like the freeware or like under some proprietary or weird license versus an OSI approved license, in which case we only care about the OSI approved stuff because we're doing this for the good of humanity. And
well, I think there's a distinction between what a tool can do and what the requirements are. I mean, a tool may be able to analyze an arbitrary repo, but we're focusing on the open source ones, and then if the tool can be used for other additional purposes, well, that's great. That's
great.
gravy.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And I
Okay.
suspect a lot of these can be reused for private repos.
Of course.
But yeah, I think at least I'm looking at that word requirement. I'm trying to narrow it, because every time you add a requirement, that's money and effort.
Yeah, well, we can. I think of this as, we're defining the sort of the big scope, or like the extensible scope, or defining our extensibility, and then we'll narrow back down to what's our first step, what's our next step. Sometimes this is called the North Star. So what's our defining our North Star, and then we'll define the steps we take to get to the North Star. Do we want to capture some as a requirement what you were saying, Michael, about open source projects? Maybe it's solution. It's like
it's just kind of a meta principle, like that if we come across problems that are more applicable to non-open source, not so much open source, then those will be not focused on. I mean, I don't want to paint ourselves into a corner where we can't do something that we want to do because we, wrote something down. But I think, I mean, at least for me, I am frequently asked, hey, what about this freeware thing? Is this, and just in my day role, is this freeware thing safe to use? And my response is, I don't know. I focus on open source. Find the team that focuses on, commercially kind of stuff. So.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right.
Yeah, nothing prevents somebody from saying, well, your tool works great for open source. I need some additional things for my proprietary software. And you say, great, start editing. Off you go.
Okay, there might be a better way to say this, which is that, I don't know, I'll think more about this first bullet, because I do think there might, there's an opportunity that we're building something that we use for open source, but a lot of companies would be interested in doing it for their, the software inside of their own, for their own proprietary use. So, okay. I think then where data may be populated for any open source project. I'm going to leave out, with repo without any work from or interaction by maintainers. I think that's still fair. So even if it's, even if it is an NPM or something, if it's available from a public repo, in this case, it would be a package repo, there's some data that we can gather about that.
Yeah, I think, it should support common repos like GitHub and GitLab and so on. I mean, there's a limit to how far you can go that. But
yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah, I would keep it general to like source code repo or package registry repository kind of thing, and that way we can scope down functionally later as we choose to implement GitHub as a more better experience than trying to pull something off of CPAN.
Okay.
yeah, to be honest, if you're encountering something like something from CPAN or NPM, I think the first step would be, okay, yank the URL of the repo, go there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I mean, but to be fair, one of the challenges we have is that in NPM, for example, and this is true for any package manager, it's not trivial to determine that the source code in, let's say, the GitHub repository that it purports to come from was turned into the thing that you found on CPAN or NPM, because there's usually a build step, and the build is not always reproducible, and so the thing that people actually install is the thing from NPM, not the thing from GitHub. So
right. I have a position on that, and I'd like to just kind of pitch it, and I'm sure I'll repitch it again, which is, I think in the long term, I mean, that is a serious problem, and we've seen a number of malicious code examples exploiting this. I think there is a simple solution, which is the package, when somebody submits to a package repo, a package repo, NPM and so on, step one is it recreates the thing from that you claim from the public repo, and if it cannot get recreated, initially that's a warning, and later that's an error, and basically eliminate that problem entirely. There's really no reason that that distinction needs to exist, other than historical, and it is creating just a bonanza for the attackers who are, so I think I agree with you that that's a problem. I think that we should do is work with the language repos so that this stops being a problem, and there are known solutions.
And Maya, from GitHub, when something's published to the GitHub package registry, is that typically done or only done through an action, or can I
No, it's not only through actions, but it's typically done through actions. Yeah.
Okay. So that would be an example of the good path, where it's all
right.
CI.
Well, and many folks use Circle CI or Travis or something, but there's going to be some pipeline. There's going to be some set of code that executes the pipeline, and if a language level repo reruns the pipeline and gets a different answer, at least that's a big red flag. And the long term, we can say nope, fail. And that would also simultaneously get these things to be reproducible.
Right. Yep. So Dan just joined us, and I believe that's Dan. That's Dan from Google. Is that right, Dan Lawrence?
Yep.
Okay, good. Hey, so I'm going to do a quick recap because I'd like to get your feedback on this. So what we're doing now is we've got a common section to this requirements document, and the requirements are across the best practice badge, the security metrics project, and also the security scorecards. And so what I've done is taken a stab at trying to define this in a way that does cross all of those. And for goals, I said collect, curate, and communicate metrics that reflect the security posture of open source components. And then for scenarios, I talked about maintainers and contributors can understand what they can do to improve the security posture of their projects. Organizations can understand the posture of the projects they depend on. They can automate internal checks based on security data. And then security researchers can understand, kind of more broadly, the posture of security projects and share the learnings with others in the community. So those are sort of the top level scenarios. Let me stop on those and see, do you think I've captured the security scorecard in there?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And now we're starting to work through a set of requirements. So I'll quickly recap those as well. So the solution we come up with may work for more than open source, but our first focus, or our primary focus, is on analyzing open source software. And the idea there is that, we're creating something, we're doing it primarily for open source, but we don't want to restrict it to, if possible, to be something that organizations couldn't use in-house, for example, or for scenarios other than open source. We want the solution to be extensible so that security criteria can be collected for not only for open source projects, but repos, packages, binaries, maybe in the future data like training data. We want to be able to cover all of those. Okay, so far?
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Okay. Security criteria can be as specific as possible. and not limited to general recommendations. So this came out of the security core card example. So for a specific programming language, the criteria might recommend linters, analyzers to be run on that code base. Actually, we had a conversation here where we said what we want is that the criteria would recommend maybe it's just recommend specific linters analyzers to be run on the code base. The thing that we didn't want to do is have the criteria be tied to a specific tool, a linter or an analyzer, because over time the tool might change, the tool version might change. So what we want is a criteria, and then the criteria could be met by running a certain, certain tools or classes of, well, a certain tool or a version of a certain tool. Does that make sense? And David, tell me if I captured your comment correctly.
In yellow up here.
Yep.
I was editing a little below there, trying to simultaneously pay attention.
You're catching up.
Which probably doesn't work as well as I think it does.
No, I was just trying to describe that when we looked at that a criteria might require a specific tool, we were concerned with wanting to keep the criteria separate from a tool that can be used to meet the criteria.
Yeah, and a particular case I can think of is, tools often get forked or rewritten, and you don't want to be stuck on the old, nobody uses that anymore tool.
Actually, as you're saying that, I think there's actually two different avenues here. One is we're telling people, when you develop code in Python, you should use Bandit because Bandit's awesome, or whatever, and that's great, but that's a should or recommend, not really a requirement. On the other side is what tools do we use to determine these metrics and calculate things, and for that we need to choose like a concrete tool. We can always change that later. What we display in let's say the UI, I think should be kind of tool agnostic. So we might talk about susceptibility to certain conditions or characteristics or whatever, but we're not saying like, Bandit output is here. Or at least we should try to minimize that to the extent possible.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
But I don't think that's a requiring tool. This is we have to pick tools in order to implement it, which isn't a requirement. It's just we must pick specific tools to implement this, of course. To implement their checking at any specific time. And may change later, and may change them later. Yeah, like you make okay, Python, maybe your Bandit's recommended, maybe you use it, but the requirement is what, PEP 8, I think?
Yes, exactly.
Right. Yeah, so PEP 8 is here, do this, and here's a tool that will check that for you. For those who don't believe PEP 8's the usual Python guidelines for coding standard, recommended coding standard, if I remember the number correctly.
I don't want to nitpick, but I think it is pretty important here. Bandit isn't for PEP 8. That's like linter, PyFormat, or something like that. Bandit is another one that does kind of slightly more opinionated security checks.
Okay.
I'm not trying to, I think it is an important distinction here. Like for something like PEP 8, we can say your code should be PEP 8 compatible, or for Go, we can say your code should be formatted compatibly with the Go format tool. But I think other cases, it's like there's a Go security scanner that most people use. There's Bandit, which most people use for Python. I'm not quite sure there is a simple standard way to say that your code meets the output of those scanners. I don't know if there's multiple things like Bandit that all implement the same security checks.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Bandit is kind of like the standard that Bandit uses is the standard that Bandit uses, and that's about it.
say you should run a security checker, and the only one we know of right now is Bandit. If you know of others, let us know, or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's not quite as simple as the formatting linking ones.
That's fair. That's fair.
All right. All right. So the spirit of this is what we want. So we want we want there to be, to have very specific criteria, and then and separately tools that can identify whether that criteria has been met.
Yeah, with that last sentence, I'm happy with it. It shows that we can and will be picking specific tools at any given time, but that's all up for change.
Okay.
Yeah, that really raises my concern as well. It's I don't want to be stuck on the old tool that's not supported and is bad.
Right. All right. Did we check you off your comment now then?
I'm happy.
Okay.
Dan?
Yep. Yeah, works for me.
Okay. All right. So our next one, consumers of the data can filter data to meet specific requirements. A couple of examples. A customer may require that the data received contain only automatable objective data. And then the second one is customers may require that data must be actionable. I think these are similar things, these first two examples. And also data can be queried at a granular level. I suspect you're fine with that, Dan.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Then we were at data may be populated for any open source project with public information, e.g. source code repo or package repo, without any worker interaction from maintainers. And then David was busy putting a problem in here. So, so why don't you explain that to us, David?
Yeah. Okay. And my apologies for those who have heard this and are well aware of this. What goes into a software, we're calling a package repo. What goes into package repos like NPM is not necessarily matching the source code repo, and we need another name for these distinctions, but this will do for now. And attackers love this because it means they can insert some malicious code, upload, grab somebody's, password or whatever, upload an update, and nobody's checking that the source code people are reviewing and the packages that everyone is actually installing match in any way. In my mind, the solution is pretty straightforward. Over the long time, I really want to see NPM, PyPy, everybody else redoing those builds when they're submitted to make sure that they match the source. If they don't match, at least warn both the submitters and users, and eventually make that an error. And over time, and once a package reproduces, then don't let a non-reproducible one show up. And so over time, that would eliminate an entire attack vector. And that would also mean that tools that we're talking about for analyzing a source code repo would be justifiably related to the packages that people install, because analyzing what nobody installs doesn't really help anybody.
Makes sense.
So what you described basically is reproducible builds, and then trying to get packaging systems to test those reproductions.
That's right. That's right. But the problem with reproducible, a lot of the folks working on reproducible builds are really at the system repo levels.
Right.
And this is at also at the language level, which in many ways is easier, frankly.
Yeah, there's another take to this too, though, which Maya wrote a super awesome paper on right before she left Google. I can try to dig up the link. Maybe Maya still has it handy, which is verifiable builds. Slightly different concept from reproducible builds, but it kind of attacks this same thing.
I'm not familiar with this term. It sounds like I need to be. Tell me more.
Verifiable build.
Verify.
Okay.
Okay.
Did you make up that term, Maya? I see you're on the call.
No, I did not make that
Okay,
up.
yeah, I think you're the first one that published it outside of. You're the first one that published it outside of Google, though, right?
Okay.
I don't know.
I've
It's
never
part of
seen another
the paper
document.
about
Right.
Yeah, all I'm getting is
Back in
Borderlands
recommendation
2. Help me
for-
out here.
All right, but this is a side topic. So for the purposes of the the security metrics system that we're thinking of, we the point is just that we want to populate data from any public location. I am going to stop for a second and do a time check. It's 9:48, so we still have 12 minutes. Do we want to keep going on this? Michael, is there something else that we want to get to? We could go through these last 3 items. We should talk about what our next steps are.
Yeah, let's keep going. Unless anybody has anything that they really need to talk about. Although I did want to give a shout out to Luigi on the converting the doc, the threat doc to Markdown, which looks terrific. For those of you who haven't seen it, please take a look. I'll wait until I don't know, maybe the end of the week to merge it, and then we should be good, unless Luigi, unless you have more things on your plate that you wanted to do before you thought it was ready.
Well, I have tried to add an alt text to images. I don't know if it is good. I hope so. And I have put the reference I have used to try to understand how write this alternative text. I think it is important. I think the Markdown document is really important to make this document more accessible to others.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you so much for doing that.
Yes.
I'll post a link to that in the chat here for you. Cool.
All right, we'll keep going then. So next requirement, maintainers must be provided with a mechanism to correct data gathered by automation for anything that they feel was made in error. I think that's true across all of the initiatives.
And so correct. I don't know about correct, but I see at least comment on. Not that I think any a bad actor here, but the maintainer is not the one that's incurring the risk. And while you do have to trust the maintainer to a certain extent, maintainer saying, nope, don't care, you shouldn't be using it. None of these vulnerabilities should apply because you should never run it in a cloud environment. Doesn't actually make the risk go away. So yeah, correct/comment is fine.
Maybe the word appeal would be a better one or something.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Not that we have like
to support
tool bugs that we should work on, but it shouldn't be someone's opinion that the vulnerability isn't important, especially if they have like a stake in the project.
Mm-hmm. To support Michael's point, just because I do a ton of vulnerability disclosures, I've had a troubling number of vulnerability disclosures where maintainers will come back and say that's not a security vulnerability, that's just a regular bug, and it'll like a CVSS score on it would be like 8 or higher sometimes, and I'm hearing back that's not a security bug. So just to support that point, that there needs to be, I think, some level of checking when the maintainers respond. Certainly we want to, respect maintainers and their view of their project, but there's often contention and we need to figure out how to deal with that in a way that's not misleading.
Now, the Linux kernel folks will gleefully tell you that security bugs are a subset of bugs, but they won't tell you it's not a security bug. Are they claiming because it's a bug, it's not a security bug? Are they claiming that bugs, by definition, can't be security related? I've never heard this pitch before.
Yeah, I think the logic on it is not there. So it's been more of like, oh, you're viewing this as a security bug, but it's actually of another type of bug. and we're like, well, it's exploitable. So I mean, so you know, and this is not what happens obviously the majority of the time, but just it's happened enough times in the last year or so to me that I'm like, wow, this is still a contentious issue at times. So I just bring it up because I think it's to Michael's point that like taking things at their word ignores the fact that we will sometimes have debate around the security relevance of something.
Yeah, we have limited time, but sometime
Right.
if you could unpack that a little bit, I would dearly love to understand this.
Sure. Yeah, no, it would be my pleasure.
Okay, so I've got it as appeal right now. So they have a mechanism to appeal.
Do we? So I think this is important. Appeal to whom? So one way would just be where everybody can kind of comment in a public, you know, we can comment publicly, and then the reader can make what they want of it. And maybe we do up-down votes or Stack Overflow style kind of reputation points. And then you kind of get into, is this like a crowdsourced thing, or is there like a council of security elders that, you know, are like the moderators of this entire system, and then how does that scale? So I think there's it'll be really easy when there are like 10 projects, but that won't work when there are, you know, 20,000.
Right. Okay. I'm going to just leave that as a comment right now for us to think about later. Next item down, any solution to collect and curate information should be usable by the greater open source community to monitor upstream security. All right. Any concerns with that?
For this, do you mean that if I am the maintainer of a piece of open source, that the dependencies that I take influence my metrics, or is it kind of like a drill-in where you can see, oh, you're using Webpack, therefore you're using Crypto Browserify, and I can drill into that and like go upstream?
So this came from the scorecards requirements, and I think what they were getting at is that any data that's created from that should be, I think it's more, should be made available to the upstream community. So it's just that it's more of a, I think the requirement is more about transparency. So yeah.
Cool.
Okay. And then the last one I had, again, this came from the scorecard, was skeleton repos should be provided that set new projects up for success. So I put a note here. It might be a little bit outside of the, it's something that it feels like not a requirement for the gathering of criteria, gathering or reporting of criteria, but something that we can do once we've identified criteria to help make it easier for people to well, anyway, set themselves up for success. All right, we have just 4 minutes left, and you know, that last one we could flesh out more, but I think what I'd like to do in these couple of minutes is think about what our next steps are. I have been thinking I'd like to do an exercise where we imagine starting with the best practices badge project, and then find a way to morph from there to what we're doing for security, you know, what the work is that's currently underway for security metrics, and then also look at the work that Dan and Kim have been doing for the security badge, and see if there isn't some way that these things all fit together. Like, for example, the security scorecard work could be used to populate data that sits inside of the best practices, the security best practices infrastructure, and maybe likewise maybe somehow security best practices becomes the storage layer, and then metrics becomes a user experience on top of that, and the security scorecard work, feeds into the storage that underlies that. I don't know if that's a good way to think about it right now, but I thought it might be interesting to try to kind of massage these three different activities and see how they could fit together.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Dan and I have had a brief conversation about this. The very short answer is, I've made sure that he can yank the CI best practices data into his. The best practices badge does have some automated mechanisms, and we've actually been briefly talking about, hey, can we, can there be additional merging and so on? Certainly, I could see in the long term, the CI best practices badge has some automation. Maybe that could be moved into the scorecard system, and then basically the badge calls on the scorecard to get some of the some automated data, and then points off to another place to get more details. I think there's opportunities for lots of ways for these things to work together with different pros and cons, and that's fine.
So what should our next steps be? But before our next meeting, which is about 2 weeks from now, David, do you, I feel like it's kind of between David and maybe either Michael or Ryan and Dan to maybe put together some options that we can
let's
talk
do
to.
It may be good just for the four of us to get on a workshop-y style call and get to a concrete recommendation that we all agree on.
What I would suggest is basically I can explain what the badge does. You guys can explain what the scorecard currently does. I don't know if there's something. I know Ryan, you've been listing metrics. I don't know if you've got another tool in mind. And then we could try to list, given that better understanding, what could be a longer term strategy. Because the badge captures things that can't be easily automated, and I think that's an advantage of it. But there's things where clearly there's serious advantages to measuring things that it doesn't support, and so I think that combining those just makes sense. We got to work it out.
Okay. I agree, and I think if we can get together and just put together even like a really high level architectural style diagram to just show how these different pieces interact and what influences what, that would really clear up a lot of the confusion about where these things should sit, whether it's this group or the other group and who does what and that type of thing. In my mind, it's very clear, but clearly there's still some confusion about it. So maybe a picture will help. I'm a visual guy, so maybe that's what we need.
Okay, so a few of us have another call coming up, so we should drop off. But that's
I will send out a doodle to figure out a time for the four of us to meet.
Fabulous.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Bye bye.